I'm John Lorden, and I've been looking into mysterious occurrences on YouTube since 2015. Joining me today are some friends from uncovered.com.
I'm Rachel Raslett, forensic psychologist and head of case research and data at Uncovered.
I'm Andrea Cipriano. I'm also a forensic psychologist, and I'm a case researcher and content creator at Uncovered.
Welcome back to LordanArts Uncovered. And today, we're looking into the unsolved 1998 disappearance of Anna Marie Scivetti from Staten Island, New York. Before Anna's name was ever printed within Endangered Missing headline, she was a talented and creative woman reaching for her dreams. Staten Island in the 1990s was vibrant. The forgotten borough had unique restaurants, stores, and entertainment that made it memorable whether you were a child, teen, or young adult. A ride on the Staten Island ferry was 50 cents, and people were flocking to movie theaters to see Jurassic Park, Titanic, and Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. Locals will remember La Rocca's Italian Ice and Pizzeria, which boasted more than 200 flavors of their cold dessert. Staten Island locals will also remember the organized crime. Neighborhoods generally had low crime rates, apart from a few brazen crime sprees in the neighborhoods with strong mafia connections. The Italian-American mafia crime families were thriving, and while it's unconfirmed, it's very possible that 34-year-old aspiring singer Anna Marie Scivetti got tangled up with a sophisticated criminal. When a young woman vanishes, along with her car, it's sure to raise many serious questions. Let's turn it over to our case experts to learn more. Rachel, Andrea, what can you tell us about Anna, and how does this timeline come together?
Anna Marie Scivetti was born on September 20th, 1963. She has been described as a free spirit and a beloved sister, daughter, and aunt. Anna was known to all as a creative individual who often spoke of becoming a singer. She recorded music with friends and belonged to a Brooklyn women's poetry club as a prize-winning writer. A friend who knew Anna in her teenage years remembers Anna fondly as someone who was relentless in her pursuit of helping others.
The friend detailed to reporters how, as teens, they had found a lost dog in Midland Beach. And instead of simply calling a local animal shelter, Anna insisted that they make posters for the dog. So, guided by Anna, the pair spent hours plastering the posters across the neighborhood. And Anna's friend remembers telling Anna that they should stop, saying, "Nobody's going to want this dog." But Anna replied, "Let's keep going." Anna's determination paid off because 2 days later, she reunited the dog with its owner.
But what no one could imagine was that years later, friends and family would be spending hours plastering posters around that same neighborhood, pleading for help in Anna's disappearance. Anna was also described as being a survivor by her sister and advocate, Angel DeRuvo. Anna managed to escape a coercive and physically abusive relationship with her then boyfriend, Charles D. Chorman, a relationship that resulted in an order of protection.
After having done some research on this case myself and looking at Anna's case file on Uncovered, it's clear that there is just a spider's web of key people in this case. Thankfully, Andrea, who likes to make visual representations, as we've seen on the show here before, she made one about how everyone connects in this case. So we're going to go ahead and bring that up. And if you could, Andrea, take a moment to let us know about the key people before we actually get into the timeline so we can try to make sense of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a web, and it does get tangled pretty quickly. So everybody watching at home, we encourage you, if you want to pause and just take a moment to take it in, read some of the descriptors that we have for everybody. But right now, I really want to draw your attention to 5 key people. So that's, of course, Anna and her sister, Angel DeRuvo, highlighted in green. Angel is Anna's lifelong advocate. And I also want to bring your attention to Charles Chorman in red, Linda Chorman in yellow, and Elizabeth Bump in purple. Charles and Linda were married for some time, at least since the 1980s. And Elizabeth is Linda's sister. So that makes Charles her brother-in-law. Anna and Charles eventually began dating in 1994.
So we wanted to note that while Anna and Charles were dating, Charles was still married to Linda. But Anna didn't know that. Charles told Anna and Anna's whole family that he was estranged from Linda and that they only stayed in brief contact because they shared a son together. The rest of the people in this web will come in and out of the timeline.
And as John said, this is a tangled case. And there's a lot of lead up and contextual evidence that's important to share. And without it, you all simply wouldn't really have the full story. So I'm also going to share now that, in the story, Charles Chorman is only ever deemed a person of interest in Anna's disappearance. He's never formally called a suspect. And with that, I'm also going to add that Charles passed away in 2020. The goal for Anna's family is and always has been wanting to bring Anna home. This feels like a good time for me to also mention that I have been personally obsessed with this case for the better part of a decade. It's honestly the case that actually got me started in the true crime space. And I've been blessed, although not under these circumstances, to have met Angel, and her passion is unmatched. So when Anna's case gets solved, it's going to be because of Angel.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for having such a strong passion for a case like this. I know it always means a lot to me personally when we do get in touch with family members and we're able to just let them know that they've got another person standing behind them, trying to help in any way that we can. So I really appreciate you, Andrea. Now that we have a solid idea of the people in this case, where does the timeline start?
So the timeline actually begins well before Anna goes missing. So we're going to back up to about 1987 when Charles Chorman is indicted in what was, at that time, New York City's biggest car theft ring in history, and it was dubbed the Salvage Switch. Authorities say the group was operating since at least 1980, and they stole and sold over 1,000 cars. A criminal associate out of North Carolina would purchase wrecked, late model General Motors cars for a few $100s from an auto salvage yard, and then ship the cars out to Island Auto Wreckers in Tottenville, Staten Island.
So once on Staten Island and in the hands of Charles and his associates, local car thieves were outsourced and paid to steal similar looking cars, mostly from the Staten Island Mall parking lot. Charles and his associates would switch the identification features from the junked cars onto the pristine stolen cars. And then they would then resell them for $12,000 to $20,000 back in North Carolina and, of course, keep all of the profits. So in some cases, this entire process was completed in less than a week.
Every now and then I hear of a criminal doing something like this, and I'm literally amazed at the amount of work that they put into a racket like this. I mean, he's literally made a business here where if he just would have found a legit sales item with the same amount of work, he could probably have been really, really successful.
What's crazy is that prosecutors estimate that the whole group made roughly $6 million, which is like $13 million today.
Okay, maybe not that successful. Wow.
Yeah. Ultimately, Charles is found guilty of being the mastermind behind this plan, and he is sentenced to 12 and a half years in prison. He only serves about 4 years, though, in federal prison. So in December of 1992, Charles is back in Tottenville, returning home to his family.
Right off the bat, we're talking about someone that's obviously smart to some degree. He's pulling off this scheme for almost a decade. It's also obvious that he would be tied to some sort of network of criminals, like literally guys at his disposal. And while he's in federal prison, who knows? He's developing other relationships. I mean, he could be adding to that. What happens when he returns to Staten Island?
So Charles moves back home with his wife, Linda Chorman. And while Charles was in prison, Linda's sister, Elizabeth Bump, moved in with Linda. So as we're leading into 1993, there's 4 people living in this house. We have Charles, Linda, Elizabeth, and then Charles and Linda's son.
Mm-hmm. And almost right away, it's rumored that Charles and Elizabeth had begun having an affair. And we think this goes on for about 4 months. Elizabeth is a home health care aide. So on April 9th, 1993, she was leaving a patient's residence on Evergreen Avenue in Dongan Hills when the patient recalls seeing Elizabeth being waved across the street by two unidentified Caucasian men in their 30s. So Elizabeth crosses the street, and at that time she's wearing a dark colored raincoat and a green or bluish colored jogging suit. And once she does that, she vanishes. And her car that was parked in the neighborhood also vanishes too.
5 days after Elizabeth disappeared, her car was found abandoned several blocks from the patient's residence. And authorities say the vehicle had been, quote, wiped clean of fingerprints. And so by the time it was located, not even Elizabeth's own DNA was found in her car. There was no sign of her at the scene, and investigators immediately believed that she was murdered.
Well, let me go ahead and bring up, we're going to start with Uncovered's page here and the map that they have to point out these two major locations. So the Dongan Hills area where she was last seen, we've got it here. And then over to the left, right now there's two marks, but it's really one area where her car is found. And it looks like it's, I don't know, maybe about 5 blocks away and then up a street as well. Dropping down to the street view for where she was last seen, we're just talking a neighborhood. And this is happening in the middle of the day?
Yeah, this was pretty much broad daylight in the afternoon.
Wow. Wow.
It makes you, it seems like a nice neighborhood. So I wouldn't necessarily have been too worried if someone waved at me across the street. But, I'm wondering, does that indicate, did she know the person or not who was calling to her from across the street? It's pretty bold to be out there in broad daylight. I can't imagine someone kidnapping her, or maybe they were just able to coerce her into going along with them.
I'm also wondering, like, did they figure out where Charles was during this time?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
And, to that point too, what you were saying, Rachel, also, it's unclear if Elizabeth got into her own car and they went somewhere else, or if she went into the car with these other guys with their van. But what we do know is Elizabeth did not park her car these like 5 blocks away from the house. Her car would have been right in front of the home. And so her car totally vanishing from the scene and then reappearing a couple days later is absolutely bizarre. She didn't do that.
Well, and the fact that it was wiped clean of fingerprints, that obviously screams something nefarious there.
Well, and I'm also thinking, like, you're stealing cars and then switching out information on them and, putting them up for sale. Like, you've got some guy that's good at cleaning cars also.
Yeah.
And it might be him. Like, I don't know. Wow. So I don't know. I'm already imagining that Charles is involved here, but what's the reaction in terms of the public perception from Charles and Linda about this apparent abduction of their family member?
It seems normal, frankly. Both of them participate in news segments and they speak to the media. Linda pleads with the public for help in Elizabeth's case, and Charles was reportedly active in searches and cooperative with the investigators. Ultimately, not much progress is made, though, and the community largely begins to forget about the case.
Wow.
So this brings us to 1994. We're a year later now. And this is when Anna meets Charles at Grant City Cars, where she was working there as a driver and he was working there as a mechanic. And at the time, Charles does tell Anna that he had a son, but he says he was estranged from his wife, Linda. And Anna believes that he's either already divorced or going through a divorce. So Anna tells friends after she meets him that she immediately does kind of sense a stability in Charles because he wasn't like some of her other typical bohemian boyfriends.
Unfortunately, though, there's trouble in paradise about 3 years into their relationship. So around 1997, Charles begins to show an ugly side of himself. By this time, the pair have a shared apartment on Raymond Place where they're living in the upstairs unit of a home. Anna's next door neighbor says that their relationship was, quote, weird, and that, quote, Anna had to call him and tell him her every move. They break up and get back together again a few times during these years.
Charles was reportedly abusive towards Anna, and there are many witnesses that speak to this behavior. So that same neighbor that Rachel just mentioned also told law enforcement and reporters that she would often hear Anna and Charles arguing, but she couldn't quite make out what they were saying.
And to continue on with that, another neighbor says that at one point she saw Charles grab Anna and, quote, throw her up against a wall, choke her, put his arm on her neck, and he left marks where his hands had been.
And so, an instance of this, one evening while Anna and Charles were at a get together with friends and family, the pair were heard constantly arguing. And Anna and Charles duck into another room. And then when Anna comes back into the kitchen, her cousin noticed that Anna had hand marks around her neck. And when Charles left, her cousin asked Anna if he put his hands around her. And she said that he did.
I just want to take a little pause in the story here and talk for a moment about abusive relationships like we're apparently seeing here. And it just seems very difficult for some people to get out of those when they're in the middle of that struggle. Obviously, there's a lot of control mechanisms being put into place here. You know, like he's watching everything she's doing. I've spoken to some victims previously, or survivors, I should say. And they've talked about having to do things like squirreling away money, making an escape kit. Like just you're literally having to plan an escape and find other resources to help take care of you in all this. I understand you're very passionate about this subject as well. Rachel, you want to share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I am. And I think one of the biggest things that we can do, especially as women, because it disproportionately affects women, even though I understand that men are also in these relationships as well, is that we can talk about this. I think, John, at one point when we were talking about this episode, you mentioned that a lot of people don't even necessarily recognize that this is a form of abuse. So I think that the more we can talk about this to our family and our friends, and to say that it's not okay, like you don't have to accept this behavior, that is helpful. I know from studying it myself, it takes an average, I believe, of 7 times for a woman to try and leave that relationship. So it's very difficult for one to extricate yourself from that relationship. As you mentioned, John, the isolation is the big factor. They isolate you from your friends, from your family, from your money. Anything that you might be able to use to get yourself out of that situation is taken away. But the other thing I wanted to mention here is for those of us that have to watch a loved one go through this, I know the temptation is to want to do something to try to convince them to leave. But the literature says, and experts in this area say, the best thing that you can do is be there for them when they're ready to leave. Mm-hmm. Provide that safe space for them so that they know when they finally reach the point that they've decided that they're going to take that step, that they know they have someone to go to, that you may have held their important documents for them and can give them the resources they need to get out.
And that can be tough because some people will go through the experience of having a loved one tell them, I'm tired of this, I'm getting out, and then, no, we made up, I'm going back. I think it's just really a good point that you really have to remain open and try to not get jaded or try to remove yourself from the situation. Just be there for them, because the other thing we know, especially from looking at cases kind of this nature, there's significant risk around the time of the actual separation. We hear of a lot of different disappearances and unfortunately murders that, boil back to she was telling him that she was going to leave him. We've heard that time and time again.
Yeah, the evidence, research shows that is the most dangerous time for people who are in these relationships, is when they finally leave. And so it makes sense to me that people are afraid to leave these relationships because they simply don't know what's going to happen after.
Andre, do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. And, like you said, the unknown after a relationship can be really scary, especially in Anna's case. We know they were on and off for a couple of years. So when you start to kind of have long-term relationships like that, to want to almost, in their perspective, like give up on it would be really, really difficult. And Rachel, to what you were saying before, also about support systems, that's something that we know really strongly in Anna's case, that her friends and her family really did everything that they could to help Anna out of the situation. And sometimes it's just too difficult.
I've also put together a page at brainscratchers.com with a video. I had several people get together and talk about this. We've also got more information there, resources to help anyone that might be dealing with domestic violence, including some very important to understand red flags and warning signs, because you might not necessarily be aware that you're in that type of situation. If you're having to hide in a bathroom while making certain phone calls so that someone doesn't hear, that's one of the things that we talk about in the video. Like there's several different things that you should look at in that list, and I think they'll make you think a little bit like, am I possibly in a bad situation here? So I'll have a link to that in the description box down below. What does Anna do as this abuse pattern seems to escalate?
It looks like in the fall of 1997, there must have been a tipping point. On the night of September 30th, 1997, Charles was incredibly physically violent against Anna in their shared apartment. The police were called. Anna got an order of protection, and Charles Chorman was arrested. Charles was charged with third-degree assault and harassment. Yet he pled guilty to a lesser charge of disorderly conduct and paid an $85 fine to be released.
So following Charles' arrest, Angel, Anna's sister, went to Anna's apartment early that next morning to see how she was doing. And Anna showed Angel her missing hair and the bruises all over her body. And Charles had the audacity to call Anna at 6 a.m, laughing, according to the family, and boasting that he was already out of jail and that nothing happened to him. He also reportedly sent a dozen red roses to Anna.
Unbelievable. Like, he's already re-exerting control effectively. Look, that did nothing, and don't try it again. And by the way, I still love you. Here's some roses. Wow.
Right. It makes my blood boil almost instantly.
Yeah.
Anna is done with Charles, and she moves out of their shared apartment and moves into her own place in Midland Beach. She's really starting to get her life back together. Anna was working a new job. She was spending happy times with her friends. She even got back into poetry, and she was taking care of her older dog, Odie. And then suddenly, after 6 months, and in the summer of 1998, Anna was forced out of her apartment by a fire of unknown origins. She packed up what she could. She took Odie, and then she began to stay with a friend in West Brighton, Staten Island, while she was looking for a new place. Again, despite this sudden change, Anna is remaining positive.
So this brings us to Wednesday, August 19th of 1998. Anna was working at Farrar Foods in South Plainfield, New Jersey, when her coworkers note that Anna was having a few tense telephone conversations, and phone records later revealed that these conversations were with Charles. He was calling Anna from a payphone outside of his place of work, Edkins Auto Sales and Salvage. So by the time Anna was leaving, her coworkers say that she was visibly upset.
And records show that Anna clocked out of her shift at 6:04 p.m. And the police were able to track that she drove over the Outer Bridge crossing from New Jersey into Staten Island to get back to her friend's apartment where she was staying. And then around 8 p.m., once she was home, landline phone records show that Charles called Anna at the friend's apartment, and the two spoke for some time over the phone. Anna's friend wasn't home for these conversations, so she's not sure what was said.
So there's a big time gap that investigators have tried to fill here. But we know that in the late evening and throughout the night, Anna and Charles are seen at a South Shore bar where they were regulars. Anna was seen wearing a black knit top, a blue and black checkered skirt with black pumps. Patrons say that the two were there together until the early morning hours, possibly even after 1 o'clock in the morning. And by these same witness statements, they say that Anna appeared to be having a good time, but Charles was brooding. At some point, the pair left, and that's the last time that anyone has ever seen Anna or her 1988 blue-gray Mazda.
So sometime between 7 and 8 a.m. that next morning, which was August 20th, 1998, Charles goes into Atkins Auto and begins his day. A coworker later told police that Charles was, quote, disheveled with scratches on his face and hands. When he was asked about these wounds, Charles waved off their concerns, saying he had gotten into a bar fight. But curiously, there were no reports of a bar fight ever taking place that night.
Wow. So we've got a day that just looks really, really bad here. Her having these phone calls, there being an obvious disagreement, somehow her connecting with him, them going out, there's witnesses. It's really looking a particular way here. What do you guys think in terms of motive? Is there a particular reason? Do you think it's just that she's trying to leave, like we were kind of talking about in terms of domestic violence? Or do you think there might be something else that would be causing this fight that they're having throughout this whole day?
So I think it's a mix of a couple things. And so one thing that's been really prevalent in a lot of online discussion and investigators' discussion with this case is that there's an unconfirmed report that Anna was sharing with a few close friends that she was pregnant. And like we talked about a little bit before, we know that even after the order of protection and even after Anna was living on her own, kind of regaining her own life, essentially, she still saw Charlie a couple times. And so it wouldn't be uncommon or outlandish to think that it was possible that she was pregnant. And so there's discussion about, that could have gone a couple different ways. Maybe Anna was pregnant and she wanted to keep this child, but Charles knew that he had this whole other life that he was still living, right? He's still married. He still has another son, and he's still trying to keep up that life too. So if Anna's coming in and saying that she's also pregnant, that could throw a wrench into a lot of things. It's also possible that Anna found out that Charlie was lying this whole time, that he wasn't actually divorced with his wife, that he was still legally married and still living with her and still trying to keep up that side of his life. And maybe she wanted him to choose. We don't know.
Good point.
And I think for pregnant women, if that happened to indeed be true, and we don't know, we all know the statistics around who are the murderers of pregnant women. That would also suggest that Charles Twerman was involved too.
Yeah, and I can't shake from my mind that we have two disappearances of women that are involved with this guy. The vehicle gets removed from the disappearance in one situation. In the other situation, vehicle still missing to this day. And this guy has a history of essentially getting rid of vehicles. The busted up ones that they would buy from the salvage yard, they had to dispose of. So it's pretty interesting to me that all these things just really seem to be lining up here and looking.
It seemed to be the same MO between both. Yeah.
Yeah, outside of the car being left behind in the first one, and even like I think about that, like, she's being waved over by two guys, and then if there's an abduction that happens there, does one of them go back and move her car? Like the logistics of that seem a little different. And honestly, that raises the question of, the first instance looks like two guys. Here, we're really only hearing about Charles being with her at that point, but that doesn't mean that someone else isn't involved in this in some way.
Yeah.
And, I'm happy you brought up the fact that in Elizabeth's case, we see that the car reappears, right? And it's completely wiped clean. It's almost like if, we're going down that rabbit hole of this direction, if this were another case connected to the same person, if they kind of learned from their mistakes and realized that bringing the car back crystal clean actually looks more suspicious than the person disappearing with their car.
Mhm.
And so that could be something that was just learned through experience. And we also know that where Charlie was working at Edkins Auto Sales and Salvage, which is now permanently closed. It's not operating anymore. But at the time, it was one of the only places on Staten Island that had a car crusher. So we don't know if Charles had any access to that device, late in the night when the shop wasn't open. We don't know. That's just speculative. But it's interesting to note that obviously here we have a woman and her vehicle that both cannot be found.
I was just going to say, I like the fact that you brought up that he could have learned from that. So many times we tend to get caught up in that old adage about people who have killed multiple people, that they never change their MO or that they never adapt. And that's simply, we know that's not true, that they do learn and they can make changes to how they're killing people.
There's another point, Andrea, that you made in a blog that you wrote about this. What's your blog website?
It's called The Crime Sheet.
The Crime Sheet, yeah. And you made a point that this is a crime where we don't have the crime scene. And what that makes me wonder is, like, on this night where they went out to the bar and all that stuff, were they in her car? Was there a disagreement that happened in there? And then did he need to get rid of the car? It wasn't going to be enough to basically wipe it down. Like, he knew he had to get rid of it because there was going to be way too much evidence to handle inside of the car. The car could be the crime scene.
Absolutely.
So when do people start to notice that Anna has disappeared?
So it's that Thursday night. Again, this is August 20th of 1998, the day after Anna was last seen at the bar. Anna doesn't show up to any pre-scheduled appointments that she has. She was going to meet with her future roommate and her future landlord to place a deposit on her new Tottenville apartment. She actually left the cash in a tin can in her friend's apartment where she was staying. So after missing a couple more social plans through that weekend, Angel, Anna's sister, knows immediately that something is wrong. And she very quickly suspects that something happened to Anna relating to Charles.
Angel knows her sister would never leave abruptly to go anywhere without telling someone goodbye or even taking her money with her. But most of all, Angel knew Anna would never travel anywhere without making arrangements for someone to watch Odie, who was 8 years old at the time. Her dog was very important to her. So because of all of this, Angel files a missing persons report before the start of the next work week.
And at first, the police don't take Anna's disappearance too seriously. They tell Angel that Anna was most likely in Atlantic City and that she would just return soon. And Angel shares that she suspects something happened to Anna at the hands of her abusive boyfriend. And again, this abuse is on record. But again, for whatever reason, the police don't make any movement on the case at all in the beginning.
So Angel's family really takes the investigation into their own hands, and they begin to uncover Charles' dangerous past and that they previously had no idea about. Phil, who is Anna's stepfather, actually goes to confront Charles himself. And after talking with Charles for about 30 minutes, Phil gets the distinct impression that Charles isn't telling the truth about his past, his relationship with Anna, or even his situation with his wife, Linda. Phil recalls that in that meeting, he asked Charles why he wasn't out looking for Anna. And Charles said he was afraid of the order of protection. But Phil knows that doesn't add up because Charles and Anna had been seen together a few times after that protection order. So doesn't really give much credence to that explanation.
It's also at the same time that Phil learns, and the rest of Anna's family also learn, that right after Anna vanished, Charles took an unplanned vacation with his family. It's unclear how long they were away or where they went, but one thing is true. When they get back to Staten Island, both Charles and Linda retained separate attorneys. Anna's family also officially learns about everything that, Rachel was just talking about, Charles' past and everything. But most importantly, they learn about the disappearance of Elizabeth Bump.
I just want to ask real quick, do we know if Charles and Linda retaining attorneys, was that related to a divorce proceeding, or are they just lawyering up for no apparent reason?
So Charles retains the same attorney that he worked with back during the auto salvage incident with the federal crime. So he gets the same attorney again, and Linda hires her own attorney. When they do ask her about that in the future, she says that she really was just hiring because of this new police attention, that the moment they got back from the trip, the police were all over them trying to ask questions. So she hires her own attorney for that reason.
Do they ever get divorced?
No, they were together until he died.
Until he died. Wow.
And so you're saying that the attorney he retained was a criminal defense attorney, I assume.
Yes. Wow. So the family learns about Elizabeth Bump.
And you can imagine that this sets her family on fire. And so throughout the winter of 1998 and into 1999, Angel organizes poster plaster events, public vigils, and she even has television talk show appearances. At one point, NYPD officers even drove around his neighborhood and his house, blasting "Where's Anna Marie Scivetti" over the car's loudspeaker.
I have never heard of that happening before. That's insane. I've never heard of police doing that before.
Bold.
Yeah. Wow.
It speaks to possibly what they thought was going on too.
Mm-hmm. And I think also to that point too, this goes back to the whole idea of like where Charles and Linda lawyer up so quickly. They both were never, ever officially spoken to by law enforcement. So there was never any questioning that happened. And Pix 11 did a really great piece about this concept of the NYPD driving around and using their loudspeaker because they knew they couldn't talk to them with the lawyers. So this was as close as they could get to showing their presence.
Wow. Do the police ever catch a break in terms of what happened to Anna or finding her car?
So whoever did something to Anna, we know that it was sophisticated. Finally, in March of 1999, so this is 7 months after Anna disappeared, the NYPD finally get a warrant to search the upstairs apartment that Anna and Charles previously shared. And Charles still held the residency there. Angel quoted investigators in the MSNBC documentary where she said that, quote, the place was completely sanitized and there was not a single drop of evidence.
And I just have to pause here because I'm sure some of you are thinking the same thing as me. He had an apartment when he was married that he lived in separately.
Oh.
So odd.
Yeah.
Investigators couldn't find anything when they did that search. They didn't find hair or fingerprints, even in places that you would suspect they would normally be in the home. So like Elizabeth's car, it appears to be wiped clean, right? And to that end, the detectives found that a bathroom sink had been replaced and some of the floors were sanded down. So law enforcement took apart the floor and they sent samples to a lab, but the testing offered really no evidence or insight into what may have happened to Anna. And because of this evidence, or really lack thereof, Anna's case is eventually reclassified as a homicide.
Well, I mean, sounds kind of obvious to me what's going on here. There's some form of evidence being covered up in the house. I mean, I don't know if the house is the crime scene, then that would make sense. But honestly, even if the car is still the crime scene and he comes home and he's just got blood all over him, some of it, gets on the flooring. Depending on how the flooring could be finished, it could be a pretty porous surface. That stuff could get soaked into it. So sanding down the floors, possibly a way to hide that. And then, of course, if he was using the sink to clean up, we've certainly seen cases that have been, helped by DNA and other evidence coming from sinks. So, Obviously, we've got a lot to focus on in that one direction here. Are there any other leads that help in any of this or give us a different direction to look at?
So in a 2014 interview, the former district attorney, Daniel Donovan, revealed that an anonymous caller sent a tip during the previous decade. So we don't quite know where it falls into this timeline. But again, this news came out in 2014. So Daniel Donovan shared that the caller claimed that he had dropped off Anna's blue-gray Mazda at a dumping ground in 1998, which was near the Outer Bridge crossing on Staten Island. And investigators had reason to believe that this person dumped the car into a tidal strait called the Arthur Kill.
After they received the tip, the DA's office and the FBI teamed up, and they dredged the waters near the Kreischer house on Arthur Kill Road, which runs along the water. Investigators found many car parts from many different vehicles, but none were linked back to Anna's Mazda. While this tip and the FBI's efforts became public in 2014, it's unclear when this tip came in and when the water was dredged.
Well, let's just take a look. I'm going to bring up the map just for a second to kind of get a sense of this Arthur Kill area. We can see it's a body of water right between New York and New Jersey here. Does seem to lead out to the ocean, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a bridge we know she crossed over. It may be the only bridge, I'm not sure, but it was obviously somewhere where she would have been.
It's also in that area where, and if you zoom out, John, you could see it a little bit. It's not plotted on our map here, but if you're, if you know Staten Island or if you're a local to New York, you might know this. There's actually a ship graveyard that's like right around the bump of that part of Staten Island.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like in that little inlet up there. And so really, I think investigators were zeroing in on that space because, as they found all these different car parts, it was probably a really common place for people to dump those vehicles. So they would have assumed, based on the anonymous tip and then this other evidence that they know just anecdotally about Staten Island, that would have been the place to look.
Yeah. Yeah. Really kind of leaving me with the question of, is this an instance of him doing this on his own, or is he tapping some of those old resources of, hey, get rid of this car for me? It's too bad that, even if they found other car parts, they couldn't have identified like, oh, we found one car down there that is registered to a sale that he made through that scam that he was doing.
Mm.
Like, just to show that there was some connectivity to that area for him in particular. But
I would be interested to know, and one of the big questions I have with Anna's case in particular also is how strong, if at all, was his connection to the people down in North Carolina from the previous, federal indictment? Because we know that at Edkins Auto, there were a lot of shipping containers and they were doing a lot of shipping of these cars. So is it possible that he would have put Anna and this car in a container and sent it somewhere else where somebody else would go take care of it? So it's not even on Staten Island. There's a lot of questions there also. So to your point, could one man do this alone? Maybe, but he could also have help and tap into the people he knew.
Yeah, he didn't have to. It seems like they're already all involved in a criminal organization anyway.
Well, and this guy's juggling 2 home lives too. Like, how much free time and a job? Like, how much free time does this guy have? Like, it's kind of amazing.
I don't know how he does it. I wouldn't be able to do it. Yeah.
So, after 24 years at this point, where's the investigation now?
So today, Anna's case remains unsolved. And this past August, we actually passed the 24th anniversary of Anna's disappearance. And I also want to share that myself, along with another uncovered researcher, Lexi Kakis, we met with the New York City office of the chief medical examiner this past July. They were hosting a New York City Missing Persons Day event. And Lexi and I spent an hour presenting all the information that you guys just heard. We presented all of this to a criminalist and a medical examiner specialist, as well as there was an advocate there from NECMEC. And we talked endlessly about Anna's height, her weight, eye color, physical characteristics, the clothing descriptions, this timeline, the addresses, everything. We wanted to give them a full understanding of this case. And really, their job is to see if Anna matches any Jane Does in their system. And so this was really just the first step in bringing Anna's case back out from the old case files and back into media attention. So, of course, this here is another big part of that.
We also wanted to let you know that Elizabeth Bump's disappearance, remember that was Linda's sister and with whom Charles is suspected of having an affair with, was formally linked to Anna's disappearance, with Charles Torman really being the common denominator connecting the two. Anna Marie Scivetti and Elizabeth Bump's case are both at a point where investigators could benefit from the public's help. Specifically, we'd love to hear from anyone who might want to get something off their chest and help bring closure to these hurting families.
And, let's be very honest about this and blunt. Charles has passed away. Like, who exactly is this big secret protecting at this point, outside of possibly if there's someone else that assisted in some way?
Mm-hmm. So you can dive in for yourself at uncover.com's page for Anna's case. The address is on the screen, and we also have a link in the description box below. There you can see all of the sources, and this is including a timeline of 53 events, 24 locations, 23 people, and 50 original sources related to Anna's disappearance. We also have a digital missing persons flyer for Anna on that page, and you can download it and share it as you see fit.
Anna's case is one that clearly needs more exposure. Currently, the Staten Island NYPD Missing Persons Squad says Anna's case is an open and active investigation. Anna Marie Scivetti is 5 feet 2 inches tall, was 115 pounds at the time of her disappearance, and last seen wearing a black knit top, a blue and black checkered skirt with black pumps. She also wore a gold Madonna necklace. Anna also wears contact lenses, has brown eyes, and often wears her hair naturally curly. Today, Anna would be 59 years old. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of both Anna Marie Scivetti or Elizabeth Bump, please contact the Staten Island District Attorney's main office at 718-876-6300 or call the Staten Island Detective Investigators Bureau at the number you've seen on the screen here, 718-697-8323. And remember, if you or someone you love is dealing with domestic violence, please know that help is out there. We have a link in the description box down below to my resource over at brainscratchers.com, but you can also call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. They're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in English, Spanish, and over 200 other interpretation services. Just pick up the phone and dial 1-800-799-7233. You can also text the word START to 88788. Thank you to Angel DeRuvo and Anna's family, the Staten Island Advance, Friends of Anna Inc., the Charlie Project, the Doe Network, NamUs, the New York Daily News, the New York Post, Pix 11 News, MSNBC, the Herald Sun, Project Angel Eyes, the New York Times, Reddit, Web Sleuths, and Wikipedia. Also, a big thank you to my friends at Uncovered.com and co-hosts on today's show, Rachel Rosalette and Andrea Cipriano. Please join us again in 2 weeks as we look into another mystery that deserves to be uncovered.